Let's rewind the tape just for a moment. I was going to ask you about SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee.
Right.
You were a member of SNCC. Let's talk about those days because it's really interesting to me, and I've never really met. Well, you knew Stokely Carmichael, Cointelpro.
Yeah.
That's incredible. I once saw Cointelpro, or Stokely Carmichael is called back in those days. There's a black and white film of him, not exactly a performance film, but it's one of his speeches. And the, Panther guys are lining the front of the stage. It's all very intense, and he's up there saying some of the most radical stuff. You need a gun to survive America. Black man, wake up. You need a gun to survive America.
And violence is as American as apple pie.
Yes, and we will give the Uncle Toms one chance to come back, like basically into the fold. If not, they gotta go.
My favorite statement from that time was, at a certain point, caution becomes cowardice. No slave should die a natural death.
So, coming from all of that, well, what were those times like?
Fun, trying, extremely interesting, dangerous.
Yeah.
A lot of, one words that you can throw in there, to the point that I remember in, was it maybe 69, summer of 69, when I was living in the SNCC office, because I didn't have an apartment, so I used to live in the office, and we were just kind of crazy and doing, all kinds of stuff, and we were running a food program for kids down in Atlanta, whatever, that the FBI ended up going to my mom's house in Tennessee and telling her, it's time to get him out of Atlanta.
See, I think that's probably what pissed off Hoover the most. And Cointelpro's like, they're feeding their own people? They're giving them enough food so they can be good students? No, we've got to kill them.
Yeah.
I mean, that scared them more than anything.
More than anything, and that it was effective, that little kids, are like sponges, and you can feed them revolution, and they understand it, that you are the future, that, there's no way that this is going to end peaceably, which is what we thought, because we actually used to think, they're coming.
Yeah.
And especially, I remember when Kennedy was killed, that was the feeling in our, neighborhood. They're coming. So everybody had their guns loaded and was kind of in the house looking out. So it was like that, and all that stuff leads up to what all that was. And we were part and parcel of what we thought was the solution and what they thought was the problem. And I remember, wow, the most drastic thing that happened in the summer of '69 was all of a sudden they took all the marijuana and all the hallucinogens were taken out of Atlanta. And the only drug you could buy was heroin. The only drug you could buy was heroin. And we were drug users, so we started using heroin.
Good planning, get everyone doped up.
People started dying off. People started ODing, dying, or just became, useless, worthless junkies. And that was the most effective diffuser of the revolution that they, came up with, and it worked. But to be in what we really thought was a revolution, or was a revolution. I mean, people were dying. I remember when Dr. King was assassinated, I flew from Atlanta to Memphis and marched with, those people that night.
You were an usher at his funeral?
The next, yeah.
Well, what was that day like?
Wow. Pretty solemn. Things had calmed down quite a bit, because I remember the night Dr. King was assassinated, I was at a campus movie. Me, a revolutionary, because I still like movies, but so I was at a campus movie, and the movie was John Goldfarb, Please Come Home. And a guy came in and said, Dr. King has been killed. You motherfuckers are sitting here watching a fucking movie. We need to be in the streets tearing some shit up. No. And everybody's like, all right. We will. Just let us finish watching the movie. It was like that. So we actually finished watching the movie. And sure enough, we went out and tore up our own fucking community like everybody else did. In fact, my roommate got arrested that night. It was the first of many arrests in his life, because he was sort of, he was part of our group, but after that particular night, when he got arrested for the first time, he started getting arrested more and more and more until he got accused of bank robbery. They finally put him in prison for bank robbery, and he spent a lot of time in jail.
Because it seems to me like when that happened, it must have been a wake-up call to a lot of people. Like, your signs, your protests, if you step too far over the line, guess what? We just kill your guy. We just take people out. That's how we roll. But it's just a hell of a time. And it's just amazing to hear you talk about all this and talk about knowing people like Carmichael, just because to me, that you all weren't in history, you were making it. Talk about bleeding edge. You were...
Yeah, we're riding around in cars and we're like doing things. I mean, we're like, you know, buying guns with stolen credit cards and doing all kinds of crazy stuff, you know, which kind of put us on the radar anyway.
Yeah.
Because we were trying to get ready for it. And then, you know, there were certain people around us. I mean, there were nights when you would miss getting a ride with somebody, and the next thing you know, that car would blow up. Yeah. And people were dead, and you go, damn, I could have been in that car.
Right.
But then it also kind of steeled you in another kind of way, because it was basically the same thing that was going on in South Africa, except, you know, they weren't owning up to it. The FBI never said, yeah, we did it.
Right.
You know, they would say those guys were making bombs and they had something in their car and they didn't do it right and it went off. And we'd say, that dude was, you know, totally frightened of, you know, he wouldn't touch a gun. He
Right.
definitely wouldn't have a Molotov cocktail or anything else in his car. So there's no way his car would blow up. But there's nobody you could tell that.
Right.
Or who were you going to tell? And what were you going to say that you knew about it? So if you knew about it, then you're a part of it, and then we're going to arrest you, we're going to do this. So there were all kinds of things going on. That was essentially almost like apartheid in a certain kind of way, but they were just a lot more surreptitious about it.
Right. Back during the Vietnam War, you'd see everybody protesting, well, those who were inclined. You know, students just get up off their ass and get civically busy.
Yeah.
These days, not so much. I think...
Because there's no draft.
I'm glad you said it so I didn't have to... Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think about what's going on now and what young people are doing and not doing? Does it make you angry? I mean, you come from being very civically motivated to where you put your life on the line so others could be free. I mean, that's pretty heavy stuff. I'm sure you're having a great time while doing it, but it was part of a much bigger picture that you were striving for. These days, I think civil rights, freedom of expression, freedom of speech is under great attack, and students don't seem to be all that angry about it.
Well, because, I mean, there's no threat to their quality of life, you know, in terms of who they are, where they are, and what and how it particularly affects them. I guess for us, because there was a draft, and if you didn't do well in school, or if you were from a certain economic strata, you were going into the Army, and you were going to be used, which is pretty much what's happening now. I mean, the kids that volunteered so that they could get, you know, use of the GI Bill and go to college and buy a house or take care of their families or do whatever. And most of them probably never expected, you know, they were weekend warriors. Yeah. They never expected to have to go and do anything. Now they're stuck in this place getting blown up every day. And, you know, we're worried about whether Paris Hilton goes home on the weekend. You know, it's like, well, how many people died that day when we wasted all that news time on that, you know? And anything to keep the war off the front page. Yeah. So when we talk about it now, or look at who's dying, it's nobody of any consequence to the kids who are watching it. Somebody might know a kid they went to high school with, you know, if they're in college or if they have a job now or they're working. But the only people who are really affected by it are the people who stayed at home or the people who didn't have the opportunity to go to a place of higher learning or who aren't out there striving to become affluent in another way or fighting to make a dollar because they understand that the gap between the haves and have-nots is getting greater and greater and greater. Because there used to be a middle class.
Yeah.
I used to kind of think I was lower middle class, you know, when I was growing up, but at least we were kind of middle class. Now there is no real middle class when you think about it. Yeah. So the people who are dying are, you know, people who don't have a voice anyway. They can complain about their kids, they can cry about their kids dying, but they don't really have a voice that the politicians care about or that the kids who are going to run the world in the next generation know or touch or came into contact with. So it's a very different kind of world out there, just because there's no consequence.
Well, I very much appreciate that you said that, and I am a big fan of your work, but I greatly admire this life that you have outside of the film, just as an activist and someone, you know, who's seen it, done it, and is part of, I think, you know, good, positive, forward-moving change.
Thank you.
And thanks for being on the show.
My pleasure.
Right on.
Yeah.